Bill, can you go get Oliver and Cordelli in here? Well, good morning, everybody. Afternoon. It's crazy time. Purpose of today's meeting is for us to get ourselves organized in terms of how we're going to go with our interim study bills. Also, I'd like to take a moment and talk about some of the requests, Senate messages, which we've had come in from the Senate. This committee's been loaded with them. We had 15 bills come in that we're to respond to, and you've gotten emails from me of where we are. We have, we're concurring with 11 of them, and then there's 4 of which we are not going to concur with that are going to go to a committee of conference. The reasons why we have committee of conferences going on is that the party on the other side of the wall is once again, you know, making Christmas trees out of our bills. And even though many of the folks over there have said we didn't want to do it, some have. So we have omnibus type bills that are coming out. 1661 specifically is one of those bills. It was our career technical education bill, as you recall, where we're talking about the competencies, we're talking about the calendar alignment between all the districts within a regional area. That bill's been added with bail reform, with health and human services, with workforce housing, with extraordinary needs grant, etc. And so there's a lot added onto that, and it presents a lot of confusion as to how and where, how we're going to work here. So on that side, and that is the bill that is primarily of concern to us that's been added with the most legislation. Today, though, what we want to do is get ourselves organized in terms of where we're going with the interim studies. And I've had a lot of communication from folks here in the committee as far as which bills you'd like to serve on. And what I'd like to do today is sort of walk through that, get ourselves organized, find out who would like to be on bills. There may be some bills that we're saying we can just take care of it with one session, perhaps towards latter part of the fall. As you know, that we can work on these bills through the month of June. We cannot do so in July and August. That's sacred time where nobody comes into here unless it's some other type of statutory committee which is meeting for some other purpose. So we'd have to pick it back up in September, October, and get things concluded there, as reports have to be back out and action taken by us. The action is either up or it's down or it's up with some recommendations. And that's what we have the ability to do. And there are a number of issues which we addressed this year, which I feel that there's a lot of opportunity for us to make some solid recommendations now and have legislation come forward in the next biennium. Yes.
I don't know if we have any students with us or Girl Scouts.
Oh, do we?
Anybody?
Oh, there's some hands up there.
Could you explain some of the terms you use, committee of conference and all that as a
Okay, it's an educational. There's a whole process in which a bill becomes a law. And any legislator sitting on the table here in the November when you first get elected can put forth legislation. And that legislation's worked with people over in what we call the Office of Legislative Services, where there's attorneys over there to help us craft this legislation in legalese. So it's crafted in a way that it doesn't conflict, hopefully, with other areas of statute already in print. Once that gets done, the bill which was, or the legislation put forth, let's say by Representative Nelson here, would come forth as a legislative service request, LSR. That LSR, then other legislators look at it and decide, I'm going to sign on to that or not sign on it and be a co-sponsor. When that's all said and done, it's proposed and sent to the House, to the Speaker of the House. That's the person who's elected to maintain order within our House and represent all of us. Then the bill is taken and put forth to a particular committee, We have a number of statutory committees. You're in one today, which is education. There's health and human services, there's agriculture, there's natural resources on the other side in the Senate. How many committees do we have? About 23 or so committees. And it can go anywhere from health and human services to criminal justice to judiciary affairs. So once it's assigned in a committee, then the committee then has to hear that bill. So it's brought forth by the sponsor of the bill, it's heard, and the bill then is in the ownership of the committee. The committee then has to have hearing on that bill, and then after we've had an opportunity to have the public give input, whether they're for or against or in between somewhere, or with recommendations how maybe to improve it, we exec the bill. That means we take action on the bill. We can either approve the bill, or we can non-approve the bill, give it an ITL, or we can retain the bill in the first year of the biennium. In this case, we're in the second year, and we have retained 15, I believe it's 15 bills for interim study. That means they weren't quite ready, but they may be ready after we work on it more. Once the bill is approved by the committee, it's sent back to the House floor for action by the whole body. All 400 representatives take action on it. Following that, the bill may go to a second committee if there's a financial note attached to it. Or if there's a way we're looking for where we're going to get the funding to support that bill, we'd send it to Ways and Means. It comes back to the House floor again, it takes action, and it's on its way to the Senate. And it repeats that whole cycle in the Senate. They have their hearings, they exec the bill. When they modify it, then the bill is then sent back to the House, and we look at what they modified, amended, and if we concur with that modification, we're basically saying we concur, it's ready now to go on to the governor's desk. If we non-concur and request a committee of conference, and that's where we are right now. We're receiving a lot of those House bills back, and we had in this committee alone 116 bills this year, and there are well over 1,000 bills in the legislature all to get in the general court. So those that have made it through where they're amended now are going back and forth for committees of conference, and this is what we call the crazy time, when we're all trying to figure out where we're going to go with these bills and how we're going to do it. Some people we may have a bill in there which we love, like the Career Technical Education Bill, to improve pathways for students to obtain a certificate in a skill area. However, they attach to it all this other stuff, all these amendments, which are so different than education. As I mentioned, workforce housing, zoning and planning issues, health and human service issues, Medicaid issues, how all those are attached to that particular bill I just mentioned. So now we have about a week in which we got to resolve that. If we can resolve it and come out with something that both sides agree upon, then it goes to the governor for his attention. So it's a long process. We're getting close to the end. It's May 26th is our last day. We have to have everything done on May 26th, except for the interim study bills, which we can work on through June. So any questions from those attending today? This is kind of an informal work session for us. I hope I've confused you, huh? Long drawn out process. It's not a simple process, but it is a good way to make sure the public gets an opportunity to get involved. So back to where we are here. We have these 15 bills right now, which we got to look at in terms of interim study, and they're all on the table, or their copies are on the table, and we'll take a look at them right now. We can either have individual subcommittees dealing with these, or we can have committee of the whole. There are several topics I've noticed where there's a lot of people suggesting they'd like to be a participant in it, and maybe just wise to just have a committee of the whole as that committee, and for everybody to be a participant in it. So keep that in mind as we roll through this. Dave, do you have anything else to add here at this time, or Mel?
I think you've got it covered, Rick, and yeah, I think we're so glad that we've got some students with us today that can watch us go through some of the more complex nuance that we receive every day.
Yeah, it's quite a process. So if I'm kind of looking at the same sheet that I hope everybody else is looking at, So the first one on top, there's 1137. This is relative to the duty of school boards to provide education. I'll read what I have in the committee report here. This bill provides more than the title provides. More research is needed for what is needed for school board duties concerning superintendents, parents, teachers, etc. In the past few years, issues have been brought up on parental input, student teaching, etc. This interim study will allow us to research existing laws, rules, policies, and maybe suggest different laws and regulations of how school boards conduct themselves and what their duties are. It's open to discussion now from the committee. I see here that Representative Hall, you had indicated you may like to be on that bill, or not? I see Representative Tanner's name down there too. I don't see Linda here. Who here had their hand, or who would like to be on that? Anybody here? Representative Hobson? Hobson, Cordelli? Anybody else? What should be the goal of this particular group? If you look at that bill, it stirred a lot of comment. 11:30.
You take comments on that? Would it go with the?
Well, from the committee here, you know, in other words, I'm trying to get a direction for the people that are going to be working on that.
Sure. I mean, I think the bill, as Glenn introduced it, enumerates a series of additional responsibilities that school boards would have. I think a lot of those responsibilities are things that superintendents generally have, but of course everything that the superintendent does, the school board's responsible for as well. But the school board doesn't actually have to be the board that does all of those things. So I think that's an important distinction here with how current law says these are things that the school board has to do, not necessarily things that the superintendent can can do and approve and acting on behalf of the board.
Any other discussion? Do we need to have a laundry list of duties in something like this, or can it be local decision? Those are questions I guess would be asked by that group. So there are four people.
Rick, that's one of the, I think that's one of the issues here.
Yeah, I
That
think
is,
so.
how much do you legislate the list vis-a-vis that of what should be the prerogative of the local school board? And I think that's going to be the task of this group, is trying to identify what the parameters should be from a legislative standpoint, not necessarily getting into every item that would then preclude locals from doing a certain thing that they may want to do that would be outside what that list might be. That's going to be the challenge, I believe, in that group.
You know, when I've served on school boards myself, probably the big responsibility I had was to develop an annual budget. And that was it, you know, primarily. And of course, we used to work with the municipality as well. Taxes. Representative Porter, do you have?
I was just
I
gonna
see
say,
you thinking over there.
Yeah, I was just saying that working on that annual budget, I mean, that's a huge thing that they have to do. And if you make up a list of all these other things, I feel pretty strongly about maintaining as much local control as possible with stuff like this. Because sometimes a community doesn't need what one community doesn't need what another community wants. And I know when we were when I was in municipal and county, that was one thing it didn't matter what party you belonged to. The idea was we don't make laws to make one town happy that's going to make every other town have to do something that they've never done before or don't need to do. So, just a word of caution, who's ever working on this, that you don't want to make the list. You don't want the thumb of the state on local issues, and schools are local. So,
So I have on the sheet here 4 names which would be on this if we have a subcommittee. It was Representative Cordelli, Representative Hobson, Representative Tanner, and Representative Hall. Of course, Representative Tanner's not here to object.
No, yeah, we had discussed this.
Okay.
Together.
So if we're good with that, we'll go ahead with that group working on that. And you gotta bring back some kind of a recommendation as to where we need to go with that. Okay, that puts 1137 aside. Next bill is 1141. Relative to special education services for children in charter public schools. It's kind of, we had that MOU bill also. There was a special education study committee last fall that heard and received much testimony. This amended bill addresses some of the issues raised by parents. These include perceived intimidation in individualized education plan IEP meetings by the presence of district lawyers, which is contrary to federal law concerning allowed participants. There were also complaints about having to sign non-disclosure agreements in order to enter into mediation, which also is against federal law. We also heard testimony of incidents where documents have been missing or inaccurate in student files, so an amendment to the bill includes provisions for parental access to records. Issues remain, however, in looking at existing administrative rules that exceed state and federal law and what statutory changes still are needed. The majority agreed that interim study was the best way to continue looking at these issues. Do we still feel the same way? We had some discussion with the way it works, or having that MOU set at the beginning of the year regarding kids which are in charter schools that have an IEP, as far as how's the sending district or the resident district going to handle that program for that youngster. Representative Mullen, you've been involved with that quite a bit.
I have, and my question, I guess, would be to Representative Cordelli, because it was his amendment to this bill that really sort of put language behind all of the concerns. And so, my question to you, Representative Cordelli, would be, do you feel that the bulk of the issues were addressed through the legislation that went through this year?
I guess the two, Rick mentioned it in his summary here, two main issues that I was trying to get at that I don't think did go through legislation was the participants in an IEP meeting, and also the non-disclosure agreements. I think those were the two of the main areas that I was trying to get at with the amendment. And I have to go back and look, because I think that one of those areas, the department did subsequently put out a technical document, technical advisory on one of those areas, but I have to go back and read what
I think it may have been on the lawyer at the IEP
the participant
meeting.
in the IEP
Yeah.
meeting. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I need to go back and look at that. But I think clearly from what we heard from parents over the past year or so, there were parents who had concerns in those 2 or 3 areas.
So Rick.
Yeah.
So, thank you. So I guess back to, I think the question that you sort of put out there is, would some or all of the aspects that 1141 was going after, could those be covered through the MOU between a charter and a,
Yeah, I
And-
think that was Senate Bill 238. Was it? MOU bill?
I don't remember the bill number
But
on that, but can the combination of the MOU and I mean, now we also have the Office of the Special Education Advocate, provide the additional supports that 1141 was trying to do?
Well, yeah, that's where I am with the advocate. Will that help? Can we take care of it administratively rather than having to do it legislatively? That would be my question to the committee right now. And Glenn, you're indicating that we
Yeah.
what?
I would not have a problem with waiting and seeing what the advocate can do in this area and see how many problems or complaints that they might get on these two areas before doing anything more, because much of this is already in federal statute. So, we could possibly hold off.
So would it be fair to do an NR pending feedback from the OSEA? Yeah.
Yeah, I have no problem with that
not
either.
recommended. Yeah.
We had a study on this earlier that you were on, Representative Mullen and Representative Cordelli and myself, along with Senator Reagan. And then we've also gone with the discussion with the advocate, the child advocate. So I personally would like to wait and see how that, works. And then, and also to get a little bit more
Can I just
information
ask
from the
one
field.
question of you, Mr. Chairman? Do you know anything about the performance audit that is supposed to be
The
taking
performance
place?
audit has not been completed. In fact, it's just on the front side. So performance audits take a long time. That's done by the LBA. Yes, Representative Cordelli.
I believe that there was possibly last week a meeting of the Performance Audit Oversight Committee. I wrote to Senator Reagan to see if there was any update from that meeting on this topic, but I have not heard back from them. I think maybe the Senate was a little busy last week also, so I will follow up with Senator Reagan to see if we can get an update.
I've talked with Senator Reagan and he told me he hadn't heard a thing back.
So Rick, it would seem to me we ought to hold on this, period.
Yeah, I think that's where we need to be on this. I don't think we should put a subcommittee together or even a committee of whole. I think we ought to just take action on this in November,
Okay.
up or down. And it seems to me that we want to just hold off and wait another year until this audit would get done, until we find out where we are. Get some good information in from the school districts. Okay, so we won't do anything with that one.
The chair,
Yes.
I'm looking at an email that I received from Representative Weber, and evidently that Legislative Performance Audit Oversight Committee is meeting today.
Okay. A lot going on. It's very busy out there. So we'll skip over 1141 and we won't have a committee. We won't have a committee of the whole either. We'll just wait and take it up in November or October, in October. Everything here has to go before the whole general court though. That's the ultimate end of it here. Okay, number 3 here, HB 1229. Establishing a committee to study school meal programs in New Hampshire's public schools and non-sectarian schools that accept public funds. The Education Committee has been approached this year with several bills that request we study what foods programs schools are using and what programs are not working. We have been approached with bills that want to explore how Granite State students can take advantage of our natural resources and farms that will benefit the students nutritionally and our farmers financially. Some questions revolve around whether local resources can alleviate supply chain issues and whether we can rely on them systematically. For these reasons and more, we need to decide on a preliminary structure of how to study these topics. Yeah. Go ahead, Representative Mullen.
Thank you. I think you threatened me with leading this subcommittee or this interim study committee at one point, Mr. Chairman. Am I correct that this would be a study, an interim study of whether or not we're going to have a study?
No.
I mean, the bill was to establish a study, right?
I
So-
got that, but we had some bills come forward like the one dealing with local produce. And can we sustain local produce throughout the entire school year? We have winters here and they don't in Florida, so they can do such things. So I think it ought to be regarding the entire nutrition program we have in our schools. Breakfast program, lunch program, what are the issues? Are there needs for future legislation? If so, what are those? I think there's potential in this topic here. We certainly had, I don't know how many bills we had come forward on it, but we must have had at least 3.
Chairman,
Yes.
you also get into a financial issue because I would think those items, the fresh food and everything would cost a little more. I hope they, local, but I would think local produce would cost more than what you buy at the supermarket or food vending.
Yeah, this is something that we need to watch. Commissioner Jasper did come here and testify in the committee, Department of Agriculture, foods and marketing, or marketing on foods. And that was one of his concerns. So it's legitimate that we should be looking at. So I would, suggest that if we have a committee, Representative Mullen, who would like to be on that committee with Representative Mullen? Representative Hobson? Anybody else? And Representative Nelson. So I will put on that committee Ellison. Woodcock also had his name down there. He's not here. Yeah, she's on there. Yeah, you're on there. Representative Hall, you're on there. Are there any other representatives that like food? Yeah. Yeah, she's out today, so she's not well. So, okay, Lycus is down. So I'm gonna put Representative Mullen. You can chair that committee. You're welcome. And then Hobson, Ellison, Nelson, Hall, Woodcock, and Leckus. Anybody else want to work on that? You're all willing to get involved with it. Remember, the committee itself has to come forward with some kind of recommendation to the body of the whole here. So it's a worthy topic. Number 4, HB 1295, requiring reports concerning school policies on classroom recordings and in-classroom observers. It's a pretty hefty topic. This bill would require superintendents to submit a report to the Department of Education on school policies concerning in-classroom videos. The committee believes this bill needs more study to look at existing policies and rules. Whose bill was this? I see he's upstairs right now.
Chairman, question.
Yes.
Is it showing videos or somebody videoing the classroom while they're in session?
It's the last, yeah. I'm looking.
Well, we can put Moffett on it. He's not here.
He's gonna be in California in the next 10 days.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Didn't we get a report from the School Boards Association that there were numerous reports on this to
Well,
begin
we've had
with?
legislation here before. Representative Cordelli sponsored that years ago. And 1 year later, we were back revisiting it. We got into a lot of confidentiality issues, special education issues, student teaching issues. On it went. And there is school board policy that, as a result of all that, a boilerplate was put forward on how to address that. I thought we did a pretty thorough job with that, coming up with that as a result of the stuff we ran into back when Glenn was, dealing with us 2 years in a row, or maybe it was a year in between, I don't know. 2 years in a row. It was 2 years in a row. We put it out there. and we got trampled the next year until we got it fixed.
By things that never came up during the public hearings.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So is there a need for us to address that? Representative Porter?
Is the existing law, does it deal with students making videos with their phones within the classroom? I mean, that might be a change that's occurred since that law was written by Representative
Yeah.
Cordelli.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't
Well,
know. I
you
don't know what the
issue
statute is.
of cell phones in the classroom is an issue in itself.
Right, but
Um,
does the statute now require school districts to have policies concerning the students' use of their phone to videotape what occurs in the classroom?
It's an interesting point. I don't know.
I don't believe so.
I don't think it addressed that.
Going on memory.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this is also dealing with in-classroom observers as well. Rep
Yes.
Moffat's not here. I don't know if I'm supposed to be fighting for him.
Well, no, just, yeah, community, yeah, he did mention that, you know, parents were, according to what it was coming across from Mike, is that they were not being allowed into the classroom. Representative Porter?
I was just wondering whether that might have something to do with student confidentiality, especially where special education is concerned. I mean,
There are times when you don't want parents in the classroom, i.e. when you're giving statewide examinations. And we had a policy also with our younger students, when we're talking about kindergarten 1, we didn't want parents coming in at the beginning of the year when the
yes,
the
exactly.
kindergarten teacher or the preschool teacher was trying to get a handle on things, mother saying this and teacher saying that, was not a very good situation. So there are times where I think that decision making has to be up to the school. And you can have PTA, PTO, PTCs where you can work with and inform them. And I think through that process, a parent-teacher club or organization or association, they will understand. And I've never had one object, and they understood that policy. So, what do you think, Dave?
Mr. Chair, is
Or,
this,
no,
is
I
this
didn't
similar to Representative Moffat's wanting to collect material on gifted? I mean, if his intent here is merely to collect what the policies would be, that's one thing, because we don't know what those policies are because of all the many school districts we have. There could be a variety of different options. So if this is merely a fact of having the superintendent submit the report, send the local policies, once those are done, then you can begin to look at what those policies are, because I don't know what the intent of the law, of what the proposal is here, other than to collect the respective policies. It doesn't say have a policy, it says collect the policies, correct?
You know, I think that could also be used as a clearinghouse, a one-stop shop for somebody who wants to spy on kids or something like that, or take other action. You know, I don't know if the current statute limits in person just to parents. Could be any member of the public, and I think you know, we've got to allow building principals to obviously be able to, you know, protect the safety and security of the students in their care.
So what do you think? It's a very difficult topic, and you can't compare one district to another. They're all different. Local school boards run the show differently. And as an ex-principal, I always had parents check into the office first when they came in. What's your purpose? What you here for? That's our responsibility to know who's in the building in case, even if there's an emergency, a fire alarm goes off, you got to know who's in your building. But there's a lot of other issues go well beyond that. So at this point in time, I think if somebody wants to pursue that on their lonesome, they can do that. But to have a whole study committee on it, I think yeah. So if Representative Moffett wants to pursue this, he's got my blessing. So personally, I don't think we got 15 bills here, folks. Which ones are really top shelf and which ones are maybe not on the shelf?
No, sir.
Yes. Pardon me? He's standing in for Representative Baldessaro, whereas Al's not here, and he's vice chair of that committee. Well, I think that I think if he's the only one that really wants to pursue that, then he's welcome to do that. We're not saying no. So let him do that. You know, there may be something he knows that we don't know right here now, that he can work with his own community on. Representative Porter.
It's important to remember too that our only recommendations coming out of these interim study committees is recommend future legislation or don't recommend future legislation. So we only have those two options. That, you know, so a lot of these topics, this gives us a chance to delve a little more deeply into them, but it does not put any kind of responsibility on future legislators to do something about it. So
The only advantage to having a study right now is like when we did on the concussion bill years ago.
Yeah.
After studying it and looking at it and researching it, inviting people in during that, we came up with some good stuff.
Yeah.
And went forward with
and
it.
that can happen,
Yeah.
but what doesn't end up with a bill. And sometimes the bill recommendation that gets worked on doesn't make it the next session anyway.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so we'll leave that up to Representative Moffett to move forward if he so desires, and we will have to discuss it anyways in October. Okay, next one, 1313. Relative rights to freedom from discrimination in higher education. The discrimination law passed last year in HB 2 applied to K through 12, but that did not specifically identify post-secondary education. The bill did state that nothing in that subsection of law shall be construed to limit the academic freedom of faculty members of the university system of New Hampshire or the community college system of New Hampshire to conduct research, publish, lecture, or teach in the academic setting. However, concern has been brought to the attention of the committee members that there may be need for language with the law to also address curriculum and instruction at the post-secondary levels. The committee prefers the option of working closely with higher education administration to obtain assurances that policy in place ensuring that all students know and experience the community college system, college and university systems as welcoming and inclusive places to live, work, and study. The Education Committee recommends interim study and is hopeful that by working together, we can build bridges and models of inclusivity without the need for further legislation action by the General Court. I think that just came out of a blurb out of the committee report. That's all these are. So that's, I can remember I believe, the sponsor of that bill. My feeling is right now that I'd like to work with the two systems, and I don't know right now if it's even worth this committee study. Further discussion, thoughts? No?
I agree.
Okay, so we're not going forward with that one. Okay. No. The next one is one, though, I think that we need to focus a little bit on here. HB 1366, Cooperative School Reapportionment. This bill was submitted for the purpose of making it easier to submit petitioned articles locally with regard to proposed cooperative school district apportionment modifications. The RSA 195:22 presently requires such a proposal to show signatures of at least 10% of cooperative districts' qualified voters. This requirement is daunting, particularly in larger districts. However, during the committee work, work, it was all understood that different dynamics occur in SB2 communities that need further consideration before moving forward with this legislation. Reapportionment. Representative Porter.
So a couple of things here. Number one, there are a number of bills that have to do with cooperative school districts that we might clump together. And number two, it was just noted that in the town of Croydon, they needed to get half of their registered voters to a meeting, and they got more than half their registered voters to a meeting. That's a pretty high standard, and certainly it was done when people are driven by something important to do it. So I don't think 10% is unreasonable. That's pretty low bar considering what Croydon just did.
On that point, Rick, you've got 1399
Yep.
and 1679. Why don't we just put those three together?
I think that's what we need to do. And my recommendation would be that there's a number of issues, not just reapportionment, but election of the board members themselves. As we found out with when we did look at this cooperative school board issue and how to elect folks, we found that some cooperatives, they're all 30, two or three of them are totally different from each other. Some were formed in the 1960s. Some have not really looked in depth at how they're how things have changed within their communities since those articulation agreements went into effect. And of course, populations have changed, wealth of the community has changed, on it goes. So I think that I'd like to see us combine the three of them together and have a committee of the whole. Yeah, just to look at that. There was one issue that we had looked at in potential amending language, was that every 10 years we do a census here in the state. Is it worth our considering that every 10 years you got to look at these articulation agreements and see if you're apportioned properly in terms of representation from the communities? That was one of the questions which came up, and I think it needs resolution. Representative Porter?
That would also require funding, I would imagine, because it wouldn't be something that you would do without an expert helping you. Like redistricting for the whole state, we don't do without being advised by people who know how to do it. So, it seems to me that it would be something that would need to be budgeted for. So there would be some money available for communities to do that.
There again, that would be something that the committee would look at and, want to discuss. So I don't want to comment on that right now, but any other, Representative Cornell?
I don't understand them that well, being from Manchester, because we don't have anything like this, but don't these cooperative districts go in with a memorandum of understanding when they join and get together? And should it be us telling them what to do with their?
We looked at that. They have articulation agreements when they first form. And those agreements then have to go on and be approved by the State Board of Education. We found that a number of districts have different numbers on their boards right now. Some have even numbers where initially it never spoke to whether you should have an odd number. And of course, that's a challenge when you're having a vote. And we know the maximum number is 15. The smallest number is 3 members. But those articulation agreements, like the district that I'm in right now, I'm in a cooperative. The Haverhill Cooperative School District is a cooperative district of one town. It initially had 2 towns or 2 high schools. Woodsville had a high school, and Haverhill had a high school or academy. The academy folded, and now they have 7 at-large board members elected in the town of Haverhill, and they're all representing the town of Haverhill. There's time for an overhaul of that agreement. That same thing is occurring in some other districts, not as much as that, but where we have districts that have populations that have so shifted that it's out of whack. It's really out of whack. And the person coming out of that very small district now really, other than being elected at large, possibly, representation is not one man, one vote type representation. It's a huge issue.
So Rick, why don't, as I think Representatives Porter and Myler have suggested that, and you've spoken to, why don't we have one, committee of the whole study, interim study on basically relative to cooperative schools, governance, governance, withdrawal, and dissolution.
I would,
Because that's the, withdrawal is the subject of 1399 and dissolution is the subject of 1679.
yes.
And so, board reapportionment is really governance.
Everybody agree with that, to take those three bills and lump them into one study? So we'll do that as a committee of the whole.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on. Where are we here?
1373.
1373, relative to the best interest of the child, of the student for a change of school or assignment. That's manifest education hardship.
No.
We have done this over and over and over again. Glenn, where do you want to go on your bill?
Yeah, this is.
Based on the new information we had gotten during the hearing process, I don't think that it requires at this point a study committee. If a member wants to look at it and get involved, they can always bring back legislation, but I don't think it requires a study committee at this point.
Everybody concur in that?
Yes.
Let's move on. 1399, we took care of that with the cooperative school. 1499. 1499 is relative to charter school, public school eligibility for state school building aid. This is a topic that's going to keep popping up at us. Not just this, but school building aid as a whole. You're all familiar with the tail, the amount of debt we have, which is over $30 million, or we have to, it was, remember, $570, $580 million years ago, and we're going to pay off that debt by year 2040. We're getting there. Each year we appropriate $50 million for school building aid, of which out of that comes paying off the debt, which we call the tail. And that's over $30 million. So that maybe leaves, what, 18 million thereabouts for renovation and new facilities. It just doesn't make it. And we know that if you talk to Amy Clark over there at the DOE right now, it's over what? In total monies needed for building that she has on her desk, $700 and something thousand, of which she cut that down maybe 40% of it, 45% of that, and that's what we'd have to appropriate. That's just for schoolhouses. Then the career tech ed centers are coming up, and that schedule is getting at the end of that rotation, and we're going to have to start going forward again. And that's not a cheap thing, capital improvement project. So we got that, and now we have this business with charter schools. And the issue with charter schools is how many charter schools own the buildings? Or are they leased facilities? And do we put state money into a leased property? Do we study this? I think we should. It's going to come up again. I'd like to know, are there any charter schools that actually own their buildings now?
I think we heard testimony.
I think they're like
three
two.
or four.
Yeah,
that did.
I think so.
Okay.
My concern is this, is that the state has already committed that they're not going to commit any more money. And so you have a finite amount of money that's already, you've got people in the queue that they can't fund. So it seems, you know, if you want to study, fine, but it just seems to me that until the state provides an adequate amount of money for school funding, why are you going to add another category into this chiseling this up with this piece of pie here, this piece of pie there? I mean, there's no commitment on the state to add more money to this, and we've been fighting this thing for 10 years, and there, regardless of what the administration is, there doesn't seem to be a wherewithal for the state to really want to put any more money into this thing. So why would we add another category into this potential? Just a question I have in my mind.
Would you see process being part of this study? Because we've heard from Representative Hill, who's the chair of the School Building Authority, about problems with the whole process, and the need to, you know, look at the process that they go through now, and that the authority, as I recall, has to come up with plans and recommendations, not even knowing whether the community, you know, has voted to go ahead with any kind of building project. So in some ways it's the cart before the horse for the authority.
This whole process, when you talk about the school building authority, that's a group that's made up of about 5 people. A fire marshal's one, then you have people from DRA and Department of Education commissioner. And it's the application for building aid comes into DOE, they look at it, they try to prioritize these, they make sure they're complete, and then they send it on to the school building authority. School building authority was initially put together to look at the bonding authority of the state and the capability of the state being able to go that direction. And then once it goes by the school building authority, of course, when it got to school building authority the last year, there was question, do we look at the same criteria for evaluating these applications as the DOE did in initially putting that recommended list together? They wanted to use a different criteria that was more fiscal oriented. We as policy said, no. The process is that they come in and they're rated based upon X number of points, 250, 275 points, something like that, based on safety, demographics, small room facilities, special education, all that are in there. We determined that it should be the same criteria until the legislature, makes adjustments to this whole process. From the school building authority, it goes then to the State Board of Education, where they have to make a determination of which ones they're approving. And then that has to all be done by January 15th of each year. So the process itself needs a look and maybe some I've heard from Amy over the DOE, there's times that they don't even see a need for the school building authority.
So Rick, on 1499, I think this committee would have a hard time either recommending or not recommending for future legislation this topic without at least some study work on it. And I think what you've put out and what others have put out certainly raise a lot of questions. And in order for us to be able to at least put I think hopefully a helpful, you know, final report together in October to be printed in the calendar, we should at least identify those things.
Okay, go ahead. Are you looking for that? Okay. This is a huge topic, and if we think we're going to sit down and resolve it in 2 or 3, you know, tries during the summertime, I don't
Yeah,
think.
I mean, I don't think we're going to resolve it.
No,
but I
no.
think what we can do is put together a report that either says something like recommended for future legislation pending further investigation into make up what the things are, dissolution of a charter, use of obligations of to the state or other credit holders, or not recommended for future legislation because, and list 2 or 3 things. But I think that's going to require a meeting to do, not to come up with the answers, but at least at least frame up the arguments.
I would agree with that. I'd really like to understand the process better. I don't have a good hold on the process of building aid, charter schools,
Are you talking about building aid or just charter schools?
all of it together. I'd really
Well,
like.
there's no, yeah, charter schools exempt from building aid.
They are,
This
and
is
when
charter
we put this together several years back, we mimicked what they were doing over in the state of Maine. And we got the whole plan of what they're doing from Duke Albanese, who was the commissioner of education over there, used to be my athletic director. And they had gone through years of putting this together, and their whole process is a little bit more complex than ours because they deal with leasing as well. I would suggest that if we're going to be looking at that topic, we need to put together a commission study of some kind in future years, work with the architects, work with engineers, work with the department, work with educators that are familiar with this process, maybe elsewhere, and come up, we're talking about just like the adequacy formula. It's a similar formula, and it's very complex. I don't think we're going to do it during the interim study. And charter schools, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right. And the outcome from an interim study could be recommended for future legislation through commission work to investigate the, complexities.
Through a commission study,
yeah.
like through an interim study, we could identify just what we've been talking about right now and get that down so legislation could be put forward with those type of based on some of those recommendations.
Heavy points to be examined by a study committee.
An interim study could take care of that within several meetings, working with Amy Clark and
Yeah,
others.
even one or two. I don't think it's a huge list.
Yeah, I'm
but
saying
yeah,
a couple
yeah.
times. So maybe it's,
Porter and Luna will be on it.
well, I'd like to be on it too.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have Porter, Luna, Ladd, and Hobson. Anybody else would like to be on that? This is for building aid, charter, building aid, the whole 9 yards. Okay, we'll leave it at that. And where I'm working pretty closely with, I'll chair that one, and then it'd be Ladd, Luno, Hobson, Porter. Okay? Yes.
Could a district save money by helping this charter school fix something? Could it be cost effective for them to help them save money because they're going to send all the kids somewhere if they don't, and may cost them more to take the kids back? I don't know. That's the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have the answer for that, Bill. Okay, number 10. (1630) requiring high school students to complete a half-year required course in the introduction to philosophy. What do you think about that?
Yeah. In the adequate education bill that we passed, remind me, I think we put logic in there. Do we have ethics in there too? Is that also part of that?
We had logic and rhetoric.
Rhetoric.
Oh, a scary word, rhetoric.
Yeah. I would prefer a theory of knowledge, but I guess
So-
we're getting
so-
there.
Going back to your initial thing, you talked about a half credit in this subject area.
Yeah, but it was specifically, I was trying to get towards philosophy as a means of inquiry. And that's using the theory of knowledge and philosophy of science. But also added in logic and ethics because a lot of times these lines are blurred. People blur ethics up with science. One is a statement of factual science as opposed to a moral statement, which is not a statement, it's an ought statement. And I think a lot of what society screws up in their arguments is that they're mixing it up. And that's why anywhere with an interim study, I'm not sure.
Representative Hall.
Yeah, I don't think this is right. I think developing curriculum is local. I don't see that we would have, if you want, if philosophy were on that mandatory list, that would be one thing, but this is about how to integrate a topic into a curriculum, thinking skills or whatever. I don't think this is even our role.
Representative Nelson?
Are there enough people to teach this? to do this?
Well, I would think that a lot of its literature could be taught by English teachers, also a lot of history, and also some of it science, as in the philosophy of science. But as the point of whether we should mandate it or not, philosophy, the love of wisdom, is a foundational to all learning. I think learning the foundation of putting together our thoughts is where you have to start with. And I think that they've kicked Socrates to the corner really quickly in most schools. But anyway.
Further discussion?
So Rick, I don't think we need a study on 1630. I think a lot of these types of subjects are also college level. I'm not an expert in this area, and I would defer to the educators like yourself, Rick, and others on to this. But I think what you're talking about here, some pretty heavy duty things that might require a more fully developed frontal lobe and things like that to really be able to process and develop that, area of inquiry. Certainly, K-12 schools do use, provide students with curriculum that covers a lot of critical thinking skills. It may not quite be to the level that you're suggesting here, but students might not be ready for that.
I think you're selling our high school kids a little bit short there, but so be it.
Yeah, I'm not selling them short. I've certainly had 2 high school kids of my own, and spent a long time on school boards and a lot of time volunteering in schools. And while I think some high school kids are certainly great thinkers and probably more mature than I was when I was in high school, I know that a lot aren't and continue to develop that maturity into their 20s, and that's no fault of their own. That's just physiology, I think. So,
Representative Porter and then Representative Ford.
So I'm going to step out on a limb a little bit here. I'm concerned, given House Bill 2 and recent statements that have been made about activist teachers, for example, that making this a requirement in high school might be very difficult to do without getting into trouble, depending on what issues were used to help the students learn these skills. And I think we need to step back from that right now and let things settle down until we know the ramifications of what's occurring in our schools right now. It's just a caution. Don't make them have to do something that if they try to do and do it wrong in some people's views, is going to get them into trouble.
Representative Ford.
Just wondering if maybe this might be one of those subjects that we might want to suggest or in some way encourage in a response such as a gifted and talented program. And so you might put reason, for example, logic, those kinds of things, just in how you make a statement that is valid, which really doesn't skirt the kinds of problems that you're talking about. But if you're going to make a statement about something, then your logic has to be reasonable. In other words, it's not convincing. And so that kind of thing might might be brought in through the English teacher or someone like that as just an aspect of writing clearly, and therefore not as a subject with the title called philosophy. And similarly, you might do it in mathematics and others, and it's just a way of the application of mathematics, in which you do a certain kind of structured reasoning without getting it all into the subject that you're talking about, any subject, that you might do it that way. And certainly if it's part of a gifted and talented level course, I think you might be able to avoid the kinds of concerns that have been articulated today.
Rick,
Mm.
I think currently in schools, I believe the Socratic Method is used every day. I mean, there's a theory called inquiry teaching, which does exactly what Representative Sodi is talking about, where you ask questions, you basically help students develop their thinking process by the questions. I mean, there's nothing more powerful than a powerful question, rather than a statement, as you're working with kids. I think that's happening in classrooms all over this state right now.
I can just tell you through my own experience, not in the state, but we did have that program in the schools. And what came in as a result, we had an individual on our staff, which her job was gifted teacher. That's, she was a gifted person, but she taught kids which are identified as gifted. And there's a whole criteria we had to go through to identify giftedness. And we used achievement scores. You had 295s or higher. You had an IQ score of 130 going up, maybe down to 128, but that was it. Leadership recommendations, creativity, recommendation of parent, recommendation of teacher. And what we found out is that we used the junior grade books process. I mentioned that a little bit when we talked about this earlier this year. And a number of other ways of thinking, as you say, Representative Myler, the ability for inquiry thinking. And what we found is that the program we had soon became a program for the whole school. And it was shared with all the teaching staff, and the level of questions and answers was so much different than the factual. And you could see there was a lot more thought involved with it. And I think that's, as I look at this, this topic of philosophy, I look more at this methodology of how to get thinking going on, and it should be utilized by everybody in the school, and to ensure that we're getting kids to get to that reasoning level and logic and thinking that is going to, really give them the tools to be ready for life. So to integrate this as a separate course, I think we're starting to look like maybe a post-secondary course. To integrate it in and embed it as a methodology for teaching and instruction through all this curriculum. We should be doing that right from the lower intermediate grades, and maybe lower than that, all the way through. So we're talking about teacher methodology or instruction, which is a local responsibility, but I have not seen anything come out of DOE in terms of this. In terms of giftedness, and we are a state that does not support that financially, whereas a lot of states do. They used to do it through their special ed program. In fact, some states had it identified as not a handicapping condition, and maybe it was for some kids. A lot of kids that are in trouble are gifted kids that are just bored out of their minds and look to other ways of, showing their responses. So I'd like to see it started, but I don't know, as a separate course. I don't know how to do that. It's going to be a very costly deal too. But we shouldn't worry about the costs here in policy. So what's the... Any over here? Any feelings on it? Representative Sadi says yes. Thank you.
That's fair.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it is. You know, and you might work with Representative Moffett on gifted education. Dr. Ranzulli down Yukon would, you know, support what you're doing. Yeah. Okay. Representative Porter, you,
I have to say this. When I had my preschool kindergarten, all those kids were gifted. Kids are all gifted. Parents all know their kids are gifted. There's just different ways of being gifted. My favorite was a little boy, oh, just a sweetheart, was struggling all the way through in reading and math in second grade, but one day a bird crashed into my picture window and died, and I didn't know what kind of bird it was, and I knew that this kid was hunting with his grandfather a lot, so I stuck it in the freezer and I brought it into school the next time I came in, and I said, "What kind of bird is this?" And he gave me all this information about the kind of bird, where it lived, what it ate, how many eggs it laid, the colors of the eggs. This kid knew all that stuff, but he couldn't read and he couldn't write. So he was definitely gifted, but he probably wouldn't be in a gifted program. So
thank you. Okay, so Representative Saudi, if you want to pursue that, go for it. Okay, next one down, 1676. Relative to making incentive grants for school district. 16, what?
64.
Oh, I jumped one. Okay. Requiring certain non-public school or education service providers that accept public funds to perform background checks on all employees and volunteers. Do we do that now?
So, Rick, I think where the sticking point was on this is the EFA program uses the term education service providers in a very, very broad definition that includes suppliers
And parents.
equipment suppliers too.
Yeah.
And that obviously some of those things like the Amazon driver probably doesn't need to pass a security check, at least for this. They may be passing an Amazon security check, but not one that's imposed through this type of statute. So this probably does require some work if it's going to move forward.
we had another bill that was working to try to find out if that was even doable. Wasn't it Representative McGuire's bill that came through? Yeah, to see if we could do something for all of the people, background checks for everybody through one main. Yeah,
That was about having the state be the clearinghouse
Some-
for
like that.
background checks.
right,
I
right.
think this is a little different, that it's requiring who should be receiving background or submitting to background checks.
Right.
And
And who should be paying for them?
it
yeah.
may get into that too.
So-
I don't recall, but I think I think there's strong rationale for this, and making sure that that anybody that's in an educational setting, receiving state funds, that should be, submit to a background check is actually, that there's one being conducted.
Is the Department of Education currently doing this?
Well, we have Attorney Fenton here. Perhaps she could update us on what's going on.
Oh, there she's hiding. Oh. I didn't see you back there. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Fine, thanks. So in regard to Department of Education
Sure.
and criminal checks, background checks and all that, is there a group over there studying this stuff right now, or is there activity looking at that at the department?
Sure. Thank you for the question. My name is Diana Fenton. with the Department of Education, for the record. Yeah, so this is an area that the department is actively working on, constantly thinking about and working on. Historically, any kind of criminal background check pursuant to RSA 189:13A was a matter of employment only. I want to be clear that the department did not play any role in background checking in any capacity. So that means, as a practical matter, prior to last year's legislative session, when the department issued a credential to teach, there was no background check done as part of that. It was a matter of employment only. The department felt very strongly that it did not want to license someone who might be unemployable pursuant to the statute, right? That was a bad public policy. So pursuant to legislation that was passed during the pandemic, the department is now doing background checks on first-time educators and teacher prep program candidates. That is done to help the colleges and universities. And the department is also doing really a clearance, a criminal history clearance for school bus drivers, which allows them to go statewide. Those are two very different functions. They sound very similar, but those are two different functions. Representative McGuire's study commission, I'm anticipating that was your question. Oh, rats. Her study commission is a little more narrowly tailored to take the idea of what we've done with bus drivers, giving them that kind of statewide mobility, if you will, to see what other professions go between districts, to alleviate the idea of having a multitude of background checks from one district to another.
Representative Porter?
Thank you. So my question is, if someone is hired by Prenda to be a guide, and that guide is working with a group of children, does that guide have to have a background check prior to working with that group of children?
The short answer is yes. I do know that there was a lot of work that went into that system. Any of those initiatives that the department rolls out, whether it's EFAs or Prenda, any of those programs, that is a natural component of it, as it was the Learn Everywhere program. What that background check consists of, I honestly, I'm not sure.
If I called Joan's piano teaching, okay, because part of my child's program is learning music, does Joan have to have a background check to work with my child?
As part of the
EFA program.
I can't answer that exact hypothetical. I know that in any of the programs the department has rolled out, the background check is a component of it.
So
how it plays out in each individual scenario is a case by case.
So if Joan registers as an education service provider
Yes.
with the department,
My understanding is yes, there would be a background check component to that.
who would do the background check?
I don't know.
Okay. That's been my concern with this, that there are people that should not be working with children for obvious reasons, and if there's no requirement that we check into them, this might be a wonderful place for them to get access to children.
There is a
in
requirement.
a nefarious way.
There is a requirement. I can't tell you off the top of my head what that requirement is. You're welcome.
So let me get this right. If
Sure.
You're going to go to Pete's piano teaching, and you as a parent decide, I'm going to send my child over here, and then the parent's also collecting a EFA, to get reimbursed for that, does the parent just have to show the invoice, the cost to Kate Baker? Or does, before you're going to get that invoice paid, that Pete's is going to have that kind of check that you just spoke of?
I would have to look into the details of the EFA program. I know from Kate Baker's testimony, they have a process by which they vet the people that they work with, but I don't know that process off the top of my head. I think what the question is, what role does the department actively play in conducting the background check, recognizing that the department is a governmental entity, thereby can get the federal background check. Right now, the department has a limited role to those groups that I told you about, which was the school bus drivers, the teacher prep program candidates, and first-time educator applicants. It is a very limited role. My caveat is always to recognize that the department is actively building this infrastructure, and we have to be mindful of what the department takes on. Not that there isn't ability for the department to do so, but we just have to be mindful of creating that infrastructure. The concern being that if any balls are dropped, it would directly harm child safety. So that's always my
Representative Porter?
So then there was also the question about the state police and the FBI and all that. And my understanding from that was that the FBI allows the department to do this. The FBI might not allow Prenda to do it because they're not a whatever. Is that accurate?
So my understanding is similar to yours, that there's two pieces that make up a criminal background check. There is the federal FBI background check, and there is the state portion. Anyone can have access to the state portion. If you want to run my New Hampshire criminal record, you can do so. It is the federal background check that is more limited, and because that is governed by the FBI regulations. My understanding is, in talking to the Department of Safety, is you have to be a governmental entity, i.e. a school district, a state agency, in order to get that background check. I do know, however, that there are certain exceptions to that rule, right? Every rule has some exceptions. And so I know that there were some, like the Adam Walsh Act would on occasion allow, for example, like a camp, right? Camps can have access to the FBI background check. I don't know the exact loophole or avenue by which they get access it, but I know that there are some non-governmental entities that get it. That's where my knowledge on that would end, and I would defer to the Department of Safety. But I can tell you, and I will feel comfortable speaking for Linda Tanner on this, anytime you look into this topic, it's just naturally complex. And so, yes, there are a lot of questions. And right now the department plays that limited role, but it is a role that we are taking on currently.
Rick?
Yes,
Yeah.
Representative Milo.
Yeah, it would seem to me, based upon this, it would seem to me that we should at least have a group look at this. It may only take one meeting where we have a report from Kate and who's ever responsible for the department. We now know who the Learn Everywhere vendors are right now. We now know who the EFA people are receiving it. So it would seem to me that it'd be an ideal time over the summer to look at this. And then again, I don't see it taking a whole lot of time, but just to get the clarification, as Attorney Fenton has said, so we're clear. And from that may be some legislation that may be needed to be more specific than what's in this particular piece of legislation that's before us right now.
Representative Cordelli?
Couldn't that also be done by the EFA Oversight Committee? I think that they have a meeting in September.
The only problem with that is that part of this bill also applies to non-public schools. So I don't know that the EFA Oversight Committee, they would be able to do the EFA part, but I think we would be looking at additional facilities if we're going strictly on the language of the bill.
Right. For example, if a district were to contract with a non-public school.
How many people would like to be on a working committee on this here right now? I had Porter, Mullen, Hall, Tanner. Are there any others who would like to be on a committee like this? Anybody else? For me?
Put me down, I think. Steve, one Republican on the committee.
Cordelli? I'll join you on that. It does raise a lot of interesting questions. Anybody else? Okay, so we have then Cordelli, Ladd, Porter, Mullen, Hall, Tanner, and Cornell on the committee. And I'm going to have Glenn chair it. Okay, so we will have that, and yeah, look forward to that. Okay, number 12, let's see where we are here. Relative to making incentive grants for school districts that improve in certain assessment scores. Representative Moffett, that was, I think, your bill, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, I won't say anything. Yes, it was mine. I was the prime.
Okay. Is it, we put down interim study.
Correct.
Should we have, a whole group doing this? Because you weren't here at the very beginning, or should this be a small group, or do we need a group?
Well, thanks for asking, Mr. Chair, if that was directed to me. Representative Hobson and I met informally with some folks at DOE, the commissioner and Mackenzie and Caitlin and a guy, Attorney Fenn, there's a guy who works there. I can't remember his name. Do you remember Scott? Anyway, yeah, so we chatted with the folks at DOE, and they're very interested in the concept. There's a lot of interest in other places as well. And not to get into the policy pieces here, 'cause if we do have a committee, but when we had the hearing in subsequent exec session, that we flagged some questions and concerns, things that we needed to talk about if something like this is to move forward, which we could get into in a interim study committee. So anyway, yeah, obviously I'd be happy to be involved with a committee to look at the pieces of this that need discussion if something like this was to move forward at some point.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is just an interesting side note. Recently, U.S. World put out their rankings of New Hampshire high schools, and they didn't use standardized test scores. And I just wanted to let everybody know that Hillsborough Deering came in quite well in that listing, and ahead of places like Pinkerton and even Concord and some of the other school districts that are highly regarded in our state. So just to throw that out as a little cautionary tale.
Go Hillcats.
Representative Hobson?
And just a quick question back to Rep. Porter. What did they use if they didn't use standardized test scores?
They used all sorts of other factors like preparation for college, high school graduation rate, et cetera, et cetera. There were a lot of parameters. I didn't read the whole statement of all the things that they used, but that not only were the schools ranked in the state, but they were ranked nationally as well. By the national rank. You can look it up. You just look up U.S. News and World Report, New Hampshire High School, and they'll get it for you.
So this is obviously a money bill too. When we're talking about putting forward like $1 million to use as the carrot or the incentive based upon a standardized test score. So obviously it's would have a fiscal note too. But a question I have is that how do you improve your test scores in your building if your average score already is at the 90th percentile?
Sure. This came up when we had the hearing and we had the exec session. Schools would be competing against themselves, not against anybody else. And yeah, of course, if a school is very high, if a school is very low, there's a great room for improvement. And yeah, we talked about that before. So in tackling that issue and coming up with a formula, that's what our committee, if we have one, would talk about. When we met with DOE, Caitlin Davis had some specific recommendations as to assessments that were very interesting. They were actually pretty excited about the concept. The actual details obviously were not there yet. But that's one of the questions that came up in committee that is a good question that we would talk about again.
So who'd like to be on a study like this? I have, that was submitted to me by Representative Myler, Hall, Ellison, and Luno. Okay, and then Hobson and Moffett, I'm sure.
I'm in.
You're in. Anybody else on this one? Okay, so we'll have, seeing that you are the sponsor of the bill, I'm going to put you in charge of the, setting up the times and all that. So it'll be a committee of the 5 people there. 1676. Alrighty. Yeah, I'd like to see, there in the way we look at how we deliver an adequate education, there's a number of indicators of that besides just standardized tests. Representative Porter mentioned a couple of them on there, but that's a laundry list of a good 12 or 13 items, anywhere from career technical education skills and pathways certification to taking the ASVAB, attendance to suspension expulsion rates, all that stuff is part of it. And so you might be looking at that as well as a way to assess, or to at least consider. So with that,
Mr. Chair, the
yes.
names again were,
Okay, it would be Moffett, Hobson, Luno, Ellison, Hall.
thank you.
You're welcome. Next one, 1679, relative, well, we did that. We put all the cooperative, for those, you weren't here, Mike, all the cooperative bills are in one study of the whole. So we're going to do those all together. Number 14,
Excuse me.
yes, Representative Hall.
Who is on that committee with the cooperative school? Who do you have?
That's everybody.
Oh, that's everybody. Okay.
That's the committee of the whole. HB 1680. This is another one where I think it's important, and I like to see this be a committee of the whole as well. We talked about a little bit of finance this year, how we fund adequate education. When it came to that last bill dealing with the extraordinary needs grant bill, dealing with the equalized property valuation for those eligible students based upon free and reduced meals. We also put a component in there dealing with weighted special ed. That's been taken out of that bill, but I'd love to see that, that it's all part of 1680. And so I think there's some components when 1680 that really deserve our attention and attention of the whole committee here. Any further discussion? That's and we've already had several working groups on that already this year, but we will continue that. And a lot of good information's coming out of there. I'm not necessarily agreeing with everything, but it's good stuff.
But I think what we can agree on probably is an approach that looks at the definition and cost of adequacy, and the approach to a fiscal policy that sort of aligns with what with what the courts have indicated to us.
Yeah, we also may want to keep our eyes on Conval.
Right.
What's going on there? So jumping to the last one we have is HB 234. I don't even remember that bill. Relative to freedom of speech and association on college campuses. Jen, when did we do that bill?
Yes, we did. No, we did that. We were a subcommittee on that bill, Mr. Chair, and Representative Mullen and I were on it.
Uh-huh.
And we put it into interim study. Who chaired it? Was it you that chaired it?
I did chair
Yeah.
a committee. It was retained, and we had
Yeah.
and then we had a 5-0 vote recommending ITL, as I
no,
recall.
No, this was
No, I take that back. We recommended IS.
interim study, yes.
5-0 vote, right?
Right. And it was, yes. But I don't think it needs another committee to study it, personally.
Yeah, we had that done years ago too, when we looked at in the status, was put out by fire.
Yep.
And since then, we've seen some improvements on our college campuses.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about at length in that subcommittee was the fire report. In fact, there were representatives there who talked about the what they considered to be a pretty significant improvement, because we had UNH that was doing okay, Keene was in the red, Plymouth was yellow. By the time they got done with all of their investigation and work, everybody was green. So that's where we want to be.
If I remember correctly, we interim studied it because we wanted the young man who was the prime sponsor to not get discouraged in moving on to other legislation in the future. So
I think it was Representative Alexander,
Joe,
maybe.
yeah, Alexander, yeah.
It is. and-
Two terms ago, we had a similar bill, not the last term when I was not here, but the term before that when I was here, and Jim Grenier and I and maybe Representative Cornell might have been on. We had the guy from UNH came and I think eventually out of that, I think we got their attention and some changes were made, even though nothing moved forward. So I think there was value just to having that committee before and also shining a light like we did.
So we need to wrap this up here today. We cannot start any of these interim studies in this facility until all the committees of conference are done. And that will be on the 19th, I believe. I hope. And then the following week is our last week in which we are in session. So we're looking at June, basically. Memorial Day is going to be coming up. And then in June, they can be scheduled and we can start. Does anybody here really have travel plans or something coming up in parts of June that we should be aware of? Brent, when are you having yours, Sue?
I'm leaving for the UK on the 19th of June, and I'm gone until the 30th.
Okay. Wow. You need somebody to carry the bags or something?
Honestly, the reason I'm going is because this whole thing started 2 years ago. I was supposed to be at a wedding that got canceled postponed and then postponed and then canceled. And so this is they have a child now, this couple. and yet my travel voucher was going to expire, so off I go.
Well, have fun. Anybody else who won't be here? So we know dates here?
4 to 21 June.
4 to 21 June.
I will be at several European venues. It is what it is.
You get all that free travel in the military.
Negative on that.
Okay. Any others?
Can I just ask a procedural question, Chairman Ladd? Does Lindsay schedule these meetings?
No, the first name person has to do this.
No, I know
yes.
I will be responsible.
It's
but
usually in
through
the
her?
summer months. It's Heather.
Oh, got it.
Oh, that will be Lindsay this year? No, that's right. Judy was not full-time.
All right, so I can get a hold of her and
Lindsay would be the
yep.
person.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So again, my apologies for that chunk of time I'll be gone. And so if not early June or later June, if we could do it in the fall, hopefully in June, but we'll work it out.
All these notice has to go in the calendar just like any other committee meeting we have, so the public is aware. Anything else? I think we're done. Thank you very much. We have an interesting speaker here on Thursday. Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious to know what the people in Poland think. Yeah, yeah.
That's gonna be, so Rick, on the motions that you're gonna make on Thursday, is that per the report that you sent out to the committee?
Yeah, yeah,
earlier this week? Okay.
yeah.
So the 4 bills that are CFC requested, are the 4 that you indicated in that?
Yeah,
email?
yeah. Pardon me?
Are the 4 that you indicated
Yeah.
in that email?
Yeah.
The Senate can say no to a CFC